I always thought I knew my wife inside and out. Sarah was the steady one, the kind of woman who kept everything organized, who'd smile at strangers, who I thought would never have a reason to hide anything. But it's strange how you can live beside someone, share a life, a home, and still have no idea who they really are. Looking back now, I can see the small changes that I missed at the time. They started off subtle, almost impossible to notice unless you were searching for them. I first caught on when Sarah started going out more often an evening here, a weekend there, always with a casual, "I'm just meeting some friends," or, "I have to stay late for work." I thought nothing of it at first. We all need time for ourselves, right? But soon things didn't add up. She began guarding her phone, turning it away whenever a message came through, taking calls in the other room. I'd hear her laugh softly, catch a glimpse of a smile, but the moment I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd go silent, shrug it off with a vague excuse. It was unlike her, and no matter how much I tried to shake it off, the nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. I'd find myself wondering, what's so secret, but then I'd push the thought aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. I trusted her, or at least, I wanted to believe I could. One evening, she told me she was heading out with friends from work. She dressed up, not just the usual sweater and jeans, but in a way that I hadn't seen in a while. She was glowing, confident, her smile bright and her laughter light. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, mixed with something else, something darker. I wanted to ask if I could join, but something held me back, a hesitation I couldn't explain. Hours passed, and she didn't text once. Midnight came and went, and still, no word. I told myself she'd just lost track of time, that she was having a good time, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. By the time she finally returned home, it was nearly 2 in the morning. She slipped through the door as quietly as she could, her shoes in hand, trying not to wake me, though I was wide awake, pretending to sleep. She moved through the room, and I caught a scent on her, not perfume, exactly, but something different, something that wasn't from our home. The smell lingered in the air, mingling with the familiar scent of her shampoo, and I felt my stomach twist. She slipped into bed beside me, her breathing steady as she drifted off, but I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a cold realization settling over me. The next morning, I asked how her night went. She gave me a nonchalant answer, brushing it off like it was just any other evening. I tried to let it go, but the unease from the night before lingered. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like there was something between us. A barrier that I couldn't see but could feel, like a thick, invisible wall. Over the next few weeks, her behavior only grew stranger. She became increasingly secretive, the explanations for her absences more vague. She'd laugh at her phone, then quickly lock the screen when I walked by. She started working late almost every other night, her tone dismissive when I'd ask when she'd be home. And then there were the moments I'd catch her staring off, as if lost in thought, a soft smile on her face that she'd quickly hide if I came too close. It was as though she was living in a different world, one that I wasn't a part of, and the more I tried to reach her, the further she seemed to drift away. One evening, after yet another work dinner, she came home with the same distracted look. She seemed happy, maybe even more so than I'd seen her in a long time, and that's when the sickening thought hit me: is there someone else? I felt a chill run through me. The idea taking root in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. The suspicion gnawed at me, clawed its way into every quiet moment, every silence between us. I started noticing other things, little details that I'd previously overlooked. She had new clothes, pieces I'd never seen her wear before, outfits that were stylish and flattering but felt out of character. She'd come home with gifts, small things, like a new bracelet or a perfume bottle, thing she hadn't mentioned buying. When I asked, she'd shrug it off, saying she treated herself, but it didn't add up. The more I noticed, the more the weight of my suspicions grew, a constant presence that haunted every corner of my mind. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if I was wrong? What if I was overthinking things? I told myself that I was imagining it, that it was just a phase, but the doubts lingered, refusing to let me go. One night, as she left for another work function, I stood by the door, watching her walk away, a strange sense of foreboding settling over me. I knew, deep down, that something was happening, something she wasn't telling me. And as much as I wanted to believe in her, in the life we'd built together, I couldn't ignore the feeling that my world was about to unravel. The days that followed were agonizing. I couldn't get the image of Sarah's strange smile, her evasive responses, and the late nights out of my mind. It was like there was a heavy weight pressing down on me, one that grew with each moment she spent away, each phone call she took in the other room. I wanted to ignore it, to brush it off as paranoia, but my gut kept telling me something was wrong. I knew I needed answers, needed to understand what was happening before it drove me mad. The idea of confronting her directly seemed too risky. I didn't want to come across as accusing without proof, and a part of me dreaded what she might say if I asked her point blank. So instead, I decided to take a more subtle approach. I started observing, watching for clues, for any indication that could either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest. But each day brought only more questions. The first thing I noticed was her phone. She'd always been protective of it, but now, it seemed as if she'd developed an obsession with keeping it out of my sight. It would be on silent, screen down, never leaving her side. When a message would come through, she'd quickly glance at it, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place before she'd lock the screen. If I so much as glanced at it, she'd shift it, subtly but intentionally, making it clear that whatever was on that screen wasn't for me. One night, when she left it charging in the kitchen, I felt a temptation so strong that it was almost unbearable. I wanted to pick it up, to look through her messages, but I hesitated. What if I found something? What if the truth was there, waiting, and once I saw it, there was no going back? The thought terrified me, but I couldn't keep living in ignorance. With my heart pounding, I picked up the phone, only to find it locked. She'd changed her passcode. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She had never locked her phone before. We'd always shared everything openly. But now, there was a barrier, something she was hiding. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, the weight of her betrayal settling over me, even though I had no concrete proof. I knew I needed more than just suspicion, I needed evidence. So, I decided to follow her. The opportunity came a few days later. She had told me she'd be out late for a team dinner, her voice casual, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She was lying, I could feel it in my bones. As she left the house, I gave her a few minutes head start before grabbing my keys and slipping out behind her. The thrill of it, the fear of being caught, sent a chill down my spine, but I was determined to uncover the truth. I followed her car at a safe distance, watching as she drove through town, taking turns that didn't make sense for someone heading to a restaurant. She was going somewhere else, somewhere private. After what felt like an eternity, she pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel on the outskirts of town. My heart dropped. The pieces were starting to fall into place, the lies and secrets woven together in a twisted tapestry of betrayal. I parked at a distance, watching as she exited the car, looking around as if making sure no one was watching. She disappeared through the lobby doors, and I sat there, frozen, the reality of it settling over me. She was meeting someone who wasn't me, someone she'd been hiding in the shadows of our life together. The anger that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I wanted to burst through those doors, to confront her right there, but I held back. I needed to see it for myself, needed to catch her in the act, with no way for her to deny it. I waited, my mind racing with images of who she might be meeting, what she might be doing. Each minute felt like an eternity, my imagination running wild with the possibilities. When she finally emerged, she was with him, a man I didn't recognize, tall, with a casual confidence that made my stomach turn. They were laughing, their hands brushing as they walked, the kind of closeness that went beyond friendship. I felt a wave of nausea, my hands clenching into fists as I watched them. They got into his car, driving off together, and I followed, keeping my distance but close enough to see where they were going. They drove to another hotel, this one even further out, a secluded spot that all but confirmed their intentions. I watched as they went inside, arm in arm, disappearing through the doors as if they were the only two people in the world. My heart felt like it was shattering, each piece breaking off as I imagined what they were doing inside. The love we'd shared, the promises we'd made, it all felt meaningless in the face of what I'd just seen. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she was putting me through, but instead, I sat there, staring at the hotel entrance, unable to move, unable to breathe. When she finally emerged, it was hours later. She looked different, her face flushed, her hair slightly tousled, a soft smile lingering on her lips. She looked happy. And that, more than anything, was what broke me. She was happy with him, happier than I'd seen her in a long time, and that realization cut deeper than any lie, any deception. As she got back into her car, I followed her home, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one darker than the last. She slipped into bed beside me that night, her breathing steady, her expression peaceful, while I lay there, staring at the ceiling, drowning in the weight of her betrayal. After that night, nothing felt the same. I'd seen her with my own eyes, watched her betray me without a second thought, as if our marriage, our life, meant nothing. Every time I looked at her, I felt a fresh wave of disgust, a bitterness that twisted in my chest, choking me with its intensity. She moved around our home, as if everything was normal, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I started watching her more closely, picking up on the little lies she told without hesitation. Every smile, every laugh, felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the secrets she was hiding. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I wanted her to be fully exposed, with no room to squirm, no excuses to hide behind. If she was going to betray me, then I was going to make sure she had no way out. In the days that followed, I started piecing together the puzzle, gathering the evidence that would make it impossible for her to deny. I went through her phone records, tracing calls and messages, each one like another stab to my heart. I could see his name, the hours they spent talking, the moments when I was at work, clueless to the fact that she was whispering sweet nothings to another man. I checked credit card statements, saw the dinners, the gifts she'd bought, things she never mentioned, things I'd assumed were harmless. It all painted a picture of a life I wasn't part of, a world where she was someone I didn't know. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. I'd built my life around her, trusted her with everything, and this was how she repaid me. I could feel the rage bubbling beneath the surface, but I kept it in check, waiting for the perfect moment to confront her. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to see the devastation she'd caused, and as much as I hated to admit it, I wanted to see her squirm, to watch her struggle as she tried to explain herself. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, she looked at me with a smile, a look of affection that now felt like a mockery. I forced myself to return her gaze, to pretend that everything was fine, even though every part of me wanted to scream. The calmness, the ease with which she carried herself, only fueled my anger. She was lying to my face, playing the role of the loving wife, all the while living a double life. But I wouldn't let her get away with it. I'd made up my mind I was going to confront her, to bring everything out into the open, but I wanted it to be on my terms, in a way that left her with no room to escape. I started planning, thinking of how to corner her, how to reveal the truth in a way that would force her to face what she'd done. The night finally came when I couldn't hold back any longer. She had come home late again, her hair slightly out of place, the scent of perfume lingering on her clothes. She looked surprised to see me still up, but quickly masked it with a smile, greeting me, as if everything was normal. I watched her, studying her every movement, waiting for the moment when she'd slip, when she'd show a hint of the truth. As she settled onto the couch, I sat down across from her, my gaze steady, my expression unreadable. "How was your night?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity. She glanced up, her smile faltering for a brief moment before she answered. "It was fine," she replied, her tone light, casual. "Just a long day at work, you know how it is." I felt a surge of anger at her lies, the ease with which she spoke them, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Funny," I said, leaning forward slightly, "because I thought you were at a hotel." Her face paled, her eyes widening as she looked at me, panic flashing across her features. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, her expression frozen in shock. It was the reaction I'd been waiting for, the confirmation I needed. "You don't have to lie, Sarah," I continued, my voice steady. "I know everything." She sat there, stunned, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the couch. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't insult me," I snapped, unable to keep the anger from creeping into my tone. "I've seen you, I know about him, so drop the act." Her face crumpled, the mask she'd worn so effortlessly finally slipping as she realized there was no way out. She looked down, her shoulders sagging as the weight of her lies pressed down on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with a sadness that almost made me feel pity. "Sorry," I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. "That's all you have to say? After everything?" She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes, but I felt nothing. The love we'd shared, the memories we'd built, it all felt like a lie, a facade she'd created to hide the truth. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. I was just so unhappy." Her words felt like another blow, a twisted justification for the pain she'd caused. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, but I knew there was no answer that would make it better, no explanation that would erase the betrayal. All I could do was sit there, watching as she fell apart, the reality of her actions finally sinking in. "You didn't mean for it to happen," I echoed, my voice filled with disbelief. "You lied to me, you snuck around, and now you want me to believe it was an accident." She looked away, shame coloring her cheeks, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on me, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the regret, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "I know I've hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know I can't take it back, but please, just give me a chance to explain." "Explain," I repeated, my voice hollow. "What's there to explain, Sarah? You made a choice. You decided our marriage wasn't enough for you." The silence that followed was suffocating, each word hanging heavy in the air, a reminder of the trust she'd shattered. She tried to speak, to offer an explanation, but I couldn't bear to hear it. I stood up, my heart pounding as I turned away, unable to look at her. "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "I need some time to think." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes, but I was already walking away, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I could ever forgive her, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay there, couldn't pretend that everything was okay. I left the house that night, the cool air hitting my face as I stepped outside. The world felt empty, hollow, a reflection of the emptiness I felt inside. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to get away, to escape the lies, the pain, the betrayal that had consumed my life. As I walked, I felt a strange sense of freedom, a release from the chains that had bound me to a life built on deception. It was painful, excruciatingly so, but in that moment, I realized that I was finally free to rebuild, to find a life that was real, a life without lies. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of resilience that told me I could survive this. I would come out on the other side, stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever life had in store. Leaving the house that night was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every step I took away from the life we'd built together felt like a betrayal of everything we'd once shared, everything I'd once believed in. But I couldn't stay. Not with the weight of her lies suffocating me, the image of her and that man seared into my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered my world. I wandered the streets, my mind a storm of emotions I couldn't control. Anger, sadness, disbelief, it all swirled together, a toxic mix that left me feeling numb. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at the universe for dealing me this hand. But instead, I walked in silence, the quiet night offering no comfort, no answers, just an endless stretch of emptiness. I found myself at the park where we'd had our first date, a place that had once held so many happy memories. We'd spent hours here, talking, laughing, dreaming about the future. And now, standing here alone, those memories felt hollow, tainted by the lies she'd woven around us. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground, and for the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd been my best friend, my partner, the person I thought I could trust more than anyone. We'd shared everything, built a life together, made promises that I believed would last a lifetime. And now, all of that felt like a cruel joke, a lie I'd been too blind to see. I thought about the life we'd planned, the future we'd imagined, and felt a deep, aching sadness settle over me. It was gone, all of it, destroyed in an instant by her betrayal. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at a friend's house, unable to face going back to the place that had once been our home. Every corner of that house held memories of her, reminders of the life we'd shared, and I knew that if I went back, those memories would crush me. My friend was supportive, giving me space when I needed it, offering words of comfort that I could barely hear. I appreciated it, but there was nothing anyone could say that would make this better. The wound was too fresh, too deep, and no amount of sympathy could take away the pain. During those days I wrestled with a question I couldn't escape: what now? I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were, couldn't pretend that everything was okay. But the thought of letting go, of ending our marriage, felt impossible. I'd invested so much in her, in us, and the idea of walking away felt like abandoning a part of myself. But I also knew that staying, pretending that nothing had happened, would only prolong the pain, trap me in a cycle of resentment and bitterness that would poison everything. One evening, as I sat in silence, I made a decision. I would confront her one last time, have the conversation we'd avoided since that night. I needed to hear her side of the story, to understand how she could betray me so completely. Maybe it wouldn't change anything, maybe it wouldn't bring closure, but I knew that I couldn't move forward without hearing the truth from her. The next day I went back to the house. She was waiting for me, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked vulnerable, broken in a way I'd never seen before, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered why we were here, remembered the lies, the betrayal, and any sympathy I felt was quickly replaced by anger. We sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid filling the room. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen." I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she hadn't set out to hurt me, but the words felt hollow, empty, a weak attempt to justify something that was unforgivable. "Then, why did it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why did you do this to us?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap as she struggled to find the words. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I was unhappy, lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart, and he made me feel alive again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known that things weren't perfect, that we'd had our struggles, but I'd always believed that we could work through them together. The idea that she'd turned to someone else, that she'd betrayed me instead of trying to fix what was broken, felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built together. "So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to cheat?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "You didn't even give me a chance." She looked up, her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. The woman sitting in front of me was a stranger, someone who had shattered my trust, my faith in everything we'd built. I wanted to feel something, to believe that there was a part of her that still cared, but all I felt was anger, a deep, burning rage that left no room for forgiveness. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice broken. "I know I messed up, I know I can't take it back, but please just give me a chance to make things right." Her words hung in the air, a desperate plea that felt both sincere and empty. I knew that she was hurting, that she regretted what she'd done, but I also knew that I couldn't go back, couldn't pretend that everything was okay. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could undo the pain she'd caused. "I can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't just forget this, can't pretend that it didn't happen." She looked at me, her face filled with despair, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd spent so much time thinking about her, worrying about her, and now for the first time I felt nothing. The love we'd shared, the memories we'd built, they felt like a distant dream. Something that had vanished the moment I'd seen her with him. As I stood up to leave, she reached for me, her hand grasping mine in a desperate attempt to hold on. "Please," she whispered, her voice filled with a raw, aching pain. "Don't go, we can fix this, I'll do anything." I looked down at her, my heart heavy with the weight of everything we'd lost, but I knew that it was too late. The trust, the love, the life we'd shared, it was gone, destroyed by her betrayal. And no matter how much I wanted to believe that we could fix it, I knew that I couldn't live with a constant reminder of what she'd done. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said. My voice steady, final. I pulled my hand from hers, turning away from the life we'd built, the memories we'd shared. It was painful, excruciatingly so, but I knew that I had no other choice. Staying would only prolong the pain, trap me in a life built on lies and betrayal. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. It hurt, knowing that I was leaving behind everything we'd built, but I also felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild, find a life that was real, honest. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time I felt ready to face them. I was free from the lies, the betrayal, the constant feeling of not being enough. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was going to be okay. And as I walked into the night, leaving behind the life that had once meant everything, I felt a quiet strength, a resilience that told me I could survive this. I would come out on the other side, stronger, wiser, ready to build a life that was mine alone. Walking away from Sarah that night had left me feeling hollow, a strange combination of freedom and loss. Part of me wanted to turn back, to fix what had been broken, but I knew there was no going back. Our love, our life, it had been shattered, and no amount of time could piece it together again. I tried to focus on the future, to think about the life I could build without her, but it felt impossible to imagine. How do you begin again, when the very foundation you'd built your life on had crumbled? Over the next few weeks, I started to piece myself back together, one day at a time. Each morning, I woke up to the silence of my new apartment, a place I'd found to put distance between myself and the memories of our life together. It was small, simple, barely furnished, but it was mine. I filled it with little things that brought me comfort: books I'd always meant to read, paintings I found at second-hand stores, a coffee maker I never used to have time for. Slowly, the space started to feel like home. But every now and then, I'd be hit with a memory, a moment from our life together that would leave me reeling. The laughter we'd shared, the nights spent dreaming about our future, all of it haunted me. I'd wonder if she felt the same, if she regretted her actions, or if she'd already moved on with him, leaving me in the past. It was a painful thought, but it also pushed me forward, reminding me that I deserved more, that I was worth more than the lies she'd fed me. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, I found myself sifting through old photographs. There we were, smiling, arms wrapped around each other, oblivious to the future that awaited us. I saw the look in her eyes, the love I thought would last forever, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. But this time, the sadness was different, less raw, more like a quiet ache. I could look at those memories without being consumed by anger, without feeling like I was drowning in betrayal. I could remember the good times, the love we'd shared, without letting it define me. Over time I came to realize that her betrayal, as painful as it had been, had taught me something valuable. It had shown me the strength I didn't know I had, the resilience that had carried me through the darkest days. I'd survived the heartbreak, the lies, the loss, and I was still here, standing, ready to face whatever came next. I had learned to trust myself, to rely on my own strength, and that was something she could never take away from me. Friends would ask me if I hated her, if I'd forgiven her, and the answer surprised me. I didn't hate her, not anymore. The anger, the bitterness, it had faded, leaving behind a quiet acceptance. I didn't need to forgive her, didn't need to forgive her, didn't need to hold on to the pain, because I'd found peace within myself. I'd let go of the anger, the resentment, because they no longer served me. I deserved peace, deserved happiness, and I was finally ready to claim it. As I continued to rebuild my life, I found myself looking forward, dreaming again. I made new friends, took up new hobbies, discovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of our marriage. I went on trips, explored places I'd always wanted to see, and with each new experience, I felt a piece of myself coming back to life. The scars were still there, reminders of what I'd been through, but they no longer held me captive. I wore them with pride, a testament to the journey I'd survived. Months later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She looked different, older, maybe, or perhaps it was just my perception of her that had changed. She was with him, the man who had been the shadow in my life for so long, the one who had taken her from me. I felt a surge of emotion, but it was different this time. No anger, no resentment, just a quiet acceptance. She saw me, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. We exchanged polite nods. A brief moment of acknowledgement before she turned away, returning to her conversation with him. I felt a sense of closure, a sense that the chapter had finally come to an end. I walked away, leaving her and everything we'd shared in the past, ready to embrace the future that lay ahead. As I continued my journey, I found myself growing, changing, becoming someone I never thought I could be. The pain, the betrayal, they had shaped me, molded me into someone stronger, wiser. I was no longer defined by her, by our past, but by the resilience that had carried me through. I was free, truly free, and the future was mine to shape, my own story to write. Looking back, I didn't feel regret, didn't wish for things to have been different. I had loved her deeply, and that love had been real, but it had also been fleeting, a chapter that had come to an end. I could look back on those memories with gratitude, with appreciation for the moments we'd shared, but I no longer needed them to define me. I was more than our past, more than her betrayal, and that realization brought me a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns, but I was ready. I had faced my darkest moments, walked through the fire, and come out on the other side stronger than I'd ever been. I was ready to love again, ready to open my heart, but this time, I would do it on my own terms, with the wisdom and strength I'd gained. This was my story now, my life, and I was ready to live it fully, with no regrets, no looking back. And as I took my first steps forward, I felt a surge of hope, a sense of anticipation for the life that awaited me. I was free to rebuild, to rediscover, to become the person I was meant to be. The past was behind me, the pain a distant memory, and the future stretched out before me, filled with endless possibilities. This was my new beginning, my chance to start over, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. As the months turned into a year, I found myself slowly shedding the layers of pain and betrayal that had once weighed me down. Life was different now, more vibrant, more meaningful in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was as if, in losing Sarah and the life we'd built, I'd gained something far greater myself. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, an excitement for life that I hadn't felt in years. My days took on a new rhythm, one that was entirely my own. I threw myself into work, not out of necessity, but because I genuinely enjoyed it. Each project, each accomplishment, felt like a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I was capable of building something beautiful on my own. And with each success, I felt my confidence grow, my belief in myself solidify. I was no longer defined by the shadows of my past, but by the strength I'd found within. But work wasn't the only thing that brought me joy. I discovered a love for painting, something I'd never had the time or patience for before. It started as a hobby, something to fill the quiet evenings in my new apartment. I'd sit by the window, brush in hand, letting the colors flow across the canvas. At first it was simple, abstract shapes and colors, but over time I found myself creating scenes, landscapes, images that held a depth I hadn't expected. Painting became my therapy, a way to process the emotions that still lingered, to express the parts of myself that words couldn't capture. I also began to travel, exploring places I'd only ever dreamed of. I went hiking in the mountains, took a road trip along the coast, spent quiet weekends camping under the stars. Each trip, each new experience, felt like a piece of myself coming back to life. I was reclaiming my freedom, rediscovering the world through my own eyes. I no longer felt the need to share these moments with anyone else, they were mine, and that was enough. Along the way I made new friends, people who saw me for who I was, not who I'd been. There was no need to explain my past, no need to justify the choices I'd made. They accepted me, flaws and all, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. We'd share laughs over coffee, talk about life, love, and everything in between. These friendships became a source of strength, a reminder that I wasn't alone on this journey. One evening, as I sat with friends at a small cafe, someone asked me about love, about whether I believed in it after everything I'd been through. I thought about the question, about the scars that still lingered, and I realized that I did. Love, in its purest form, was still something I believed in. I'd seen the damage that betrayal could cause, but I'd also seen the strength that came from surviving it. I knew that love was real, that it was possible to find someone who would value and respect me. But I also knew that I didn't need it to feel whole. I was complete on my own, and any love I found in the future would be an addition to a life already full. In time I found myself setting new goals, dreaming new dreams. I started saving for a small art studio, a place where I could paint and create without interruption. I began to volunteer at a community center, teaching art to kids who reminded me of myself, full of curiosity and wonder. It was fulfilling in a way I hadn't expected, a way to give back, to use my experiences to make a difference. Every step I took, every decision I made, felt like a testament to my growth, to the person I'd become. I was no longer haunted by the past, no longer defined by the hurt I'd endured. Instead, I was defined by the strength I'd found, by the resilience that had carried me through the darkest days. I was proud of who I was, of the life I was building, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. There were still moments when the memories would surface, unbidden, catching me off guard. I'd remember the good times, the laughter, the love we'd shared, and a pang of sadness would settle over me, but those moments no longer held the power they once did. I could look back on our time together with gratitude, with appreciation for the lessons I'd learned. I no longer felt anger or resentment. I'd let go of those emotions, leaving room for forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. I forgave myself for trusting her, for believing in something that had ultimately failed. I forgave myself for the nights spent questioning my worth, for the times I'd blamed myself for her choices. I realized that I'd done nothing wrong, that her betrayal was a reflection of her own insecurities, her own unhappiness. And in that realization I found a sense of closure, a release from the guilt that had lingered for so long. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through, on the journey that had brought me to this place of peace and contentment. I was stronger, wiser, more resilient than I'd ever been. I knew who I was, knew what I wanted, and I was no longer afraid to go after it. I'd built a life that was entirely my own, a life that was full of purpose, of meaning, and I was proud of that. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain, for the heartbreak, for the betrayal that had led me here. It had been a brutal journey, one I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it had also been transformative. I'd emerged on the other side stronger, more whole, ready to face whatever life had in store. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs, and let it out slowly, a sense of calm washing over me. This was my life, my story, and I was ready to write the next chapter. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if love or heartbreak would come my way again, but I knew that I was prepared, that I could handle whatever came next. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt exhilarating, full of possibility. In the months that followed, I continued to explore, to create, to live fully. Each day brought new experiences, new challenges, and I embraced them all with an open heart. I was no longer defined by the past, no longer haunted by the shadows of what had been. Instead, I was focused on the present, on the life I was building, a life that was rich, fulfilling, and entirely my own. Looking back, I felt a sense of pride in the journey I'd undertaken. I had faced the darkest parts of myself, had walked through the fire, and emerged stronger, more resilient. I was no longer afraid of heartbreak, no longer afraid of pain, because I knew that I could survive it. I had built a life that was full of purpose, of meaning, a life that was worth living. And as I moved forward, I knew that whatever came my way, I would be ready. I was no longer the person I'd been when I'd walked away from Sarah, no longer the man who had been broken by betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, more whole than I'd ever been, and I was ready to face the future with open arms. This was my story, my life, and I was ready to live it fully, without fear, without hesitation. The journey had been hard, but it had also been beautiful, and I wouldn't change a single moment. A year had passed since I'd walked away from Sarah, and in that time, I'd grown in ways I never thought possible. The life I'd built was something I was proud of, a testament to the resilience I'd found in myself. The pain of the past still lingered in small ways, surfacing occasionally as a reminder of the journey I'd endured, but it no longer held power over me. I was free, truly free, and I'd embraced that freedom with an open heart. I often found myself reflecting on how far I'd come, on the changes I'd made, both within myself and in the life I'd built. I'd found peace, a quiet sense of fulfillment that had once felt so far out of reach. I was surrounded by people who valued me, who saw me for who I truly was, and I no longer felt the need to prove myself, to seek validation from others. I was enough, just as I was, and that realization brought a depth of contentment I hadn't known before. One evening, as I sat in my art studio, surrounded by paintings that told the story of my journey, I felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain, for the heartbreak, for the betrayal that had led me here. Without it, I wouldn't be the person I was today. I'd discovered parts of myself that I hadn't known existed, strengths that had lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The pain had been my catalyst, the fire that had forged me into someone stronger, more resilient. I thought about Sarah sometimes, not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet understanding. She'd been a part of my life, a chapter that had ended, and I was grateful for the lessons she'd taught me. I didn't know where she was or what her life looked like now, but I wished her well, hoped that she too had found peace. Letting go of that anger had been one of the hardest things I'd done, but it had also been the most freeing. I was no longer defined by her choices, no longer bound by the hurt she'd caused. My life was filled with meaning now, each day a new opportunity to grow, to create, to live fully. I'd built friendships that were deep and genuine, connections that filled my days with laughter and joy. I'd pursued passions I'd once set aside, discovering a love for art, for teaching, for exploring the world around me. Each moment felt like a gift, a reminder of the freedom I'd gained by choosing myself. I'd come to understand that love wasn't something to be feared, that heartbreak was a part of the human experience, a chapter in the journey of life. I no longer felt the need to protect myself, to guard my heart so fiercely. I was open to love, to connection, but I also knew that I was complete on my own. I didn't need someone else to define me, to make me whole. I was enough, and any love that came into my life would be a beautiful addition, not a necessity. As I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of anticipation, a readiness to embrace whatever lay ahead. I no longer saw the past as something to run from, but as a part of my story, a chapter that had shaped me. I was grateful for every moment, every challenge, every lesson, because they had brought me to this place of peace and strength. Standing by the window one evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, I felt a quiet joy settle over me. I was content, truly content, and the future felt bright, full of endless possibilities. This was my life, my journey, and I was ready to live it fully, with an open heart and a resilient spirit. The past was behind me, a memory that I could look back on with peace, and the future stretched out before me, waiting to be written. This was my new beginning, a chance to live on my terms, to embrace the life I'd always dreamed of, and as I took that first step forward, I knew that I was ready. Ready to love, ready to grow, ready to face whatever challenges came my way. I was no longer defined by the heartbreak, by the betrayal. I was defined by the strength I'd found within myself, the resilience that had carried me through. This was my story, my life, and I was ready to live it fully. The journey had been hard, but it had also been beautiful, and I wouldn't change a single moment. I was free, truly free, and the future was mine to shape. If you're ready for more stories of strength, love, and transformation, hit subscribe and join me in uncovering life's lessons together. Let's keep growing and moving forward, one story at a time.